All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Unfiltered Fridays on the Consistency Corner podcast. I just love these behind the scenes conversations. And if you're new here and haven't listened to many of our Unfiltered Fridays, these are the conversations that often happen before a podcast or after a podcast that I was like, more people need to be having these conversations publicly because this is where the real magic happens. Having other mompreneurs on my podcast is my favorite way to connect with my community. And I'm so excited to have Theresa Lear Levine today. Theresa and I actually connected. She was on my friend Lori's podcast. I reached out to her and was like, I loved what you had to say. I started listening to her podcast. We connected. I have worked with her and she has been in the process of writing a book. And so that's one of the things that I definitely want to talk about is what does that process look like for a busy mompreneur?
We only have half an hour, right?
Yeah, and hear more about her work around working with female entrepreneurs through EFT, through becoming more yourself. I reached out to her for some support around high functioning anxiety and just all the things that again, maybe we're not talking about publicly, but we should, because let's normalize that we struggle with these things. So Theresa, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you on the show.
Oh, I was just thrilled that you invited me, Ruthie. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we get into our conversation today, can you share with the listeners a little bit more about your journey, your business journey, what you do today, and how you support your clients?
Sure. So I'm Theresa Lear Levine. I live in Davidsonville, Maryland, which is pretty close to Washington, D.C. And I'm a mom of 4 boys. My boys are 6, 10 as of yesterday, um, 13 and 18. I just had one start college this year. And I'm the founder of Becoming More Me, which is the iteration of my business that began right about as the pandemic was beginning. And I personally have high functioning anxiety, just like you. ADHD wasn't diagnosed until my early 40s, but it's definitely been a prevalent part of my life for, my whole life. And, I kind of made this pivot about 7 years ago when my youngest was coming into the world, kind of realizing that, man, I have such a blessed life. There's so many amazing things going on in my life. And also, I feel chaotic and stressed and just this is not how a blessed life should feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I really started going deeper into understanding mindfulness and really exploring a lot of different things. I, came into practicing emotional freedom techniques and really became very interested in understanding regulation of our nervous system, hypnotherapy, and a lot of other modalities that I just felt weaved together beautifully and all had a place in my own transformation. So I gave them a place in how I help others transform as well through my Becoming More Me signature program.
Yeah, I
And
love that. And a question I have, you said something about regulated nervous system. And I don't know if this is the reticular, whatever is the RAS, showing you things. Once I became aware of nervous system regulation, of course, now I'm seeing stuff about this everywhere, where 2 years ago, I'd never even heard of nervous system regulation. So if somebody is new to that term, can you kind of give an overview of what that even means?
sure. So our nervous system is the foundation of what's created when we start forming as human beings. So at the base of our spine is kind of where it begins. And it is what kind of helps with our fight, flight, freeze, flee, all that kind of stuff, which is also like our amygdala, that little almond shaped part of our brain. And when we are feeling regulated, I'm not going to go into major detail about the nervous system. That could be like a whole half an hour on its own.
Maybe
But
like a whole book.
yeah, and I do agree. I see more and more about it, and I often wonder: is it because I'm in the the area and the space of nervous system regulation, or is it because it's just becoming more of like a buzzword?
Yeah.
But I feel like when your nervous system's regulated, which happens through using things like hypnotherapy or EFT, or even other things like exercise, or just understanding when you're feeling dysregulated,
Mhm.
um, we can get back into regulation. When we're feeling regulated, we feel that grounded wholeness. We feel calm. We feel like we have perspective on things. We can easily reframe and be more in our logical, rational mind.
Mhm.
And when we're dysregulated, that's usually when we're feeling anxious or just kind of chaotic, just kind of bouncing from thing to thing, or not being able to get out of our monkey mind and that kind of thing. So those for me are indicators of when I'm in dysregulation or regulation. And I'll also just say that it's not one and done work. It's not like you learn
Mhm.
how to regulate your nervous system and then all of a sudden you're regulated forevermore. You know, I
I wish
wish.
it worked that way, but no, it does not.
I mean, but also like there's function to our dysregulation. You
Mhm.
know, it has something to show us, it has something to teach us, and there's reasons for it. So when we understand it, we can value those messages that are coming through in our dysregulation just as much as we can value feeling calm and safe in our regulation. So it
Yeah.
all has its place, kind of like, our fight, flight, freeze, flee, fawn, all of that has a purpose too. We need that in order for survival and everything else. We just don't necessarily need it to kick in when it's something little that we're responding to in the same way that we might have in our cavewoman days when we were being chased by a saber-toothed, tiger or something like that. That's not happening when we get, triggered by a coworker or something like that, yet our body responds the same way.
Yeah. I
And
read something the other day that said, a regulated nervous system, it doesn't mean that you don't feel sadness or anger.
yeah,
It's that you understand what that emotion is teaching you and telling you, and then you're able to process the emotion and sit with it and work with it. And when you and I first started working together, I remember saying something to you about like the work. Like I read all the books, I listened to all the
I
podcasts,
remember that conversation.
and everybody keeps saying you have to do the work. But what is the work? And I think that's the nervous system part, is the like you're taking in the information and you're not seeing the transformation. And I think
Right.
that has to do with that regulation piece.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's being able to move flexibly between those states is
Mhm.
really kind of what having a good regulated nervous system is all about, so that you can develop that resiliency inside of yourself. And yeah, I think a lot of people don't know what the work is. I loved it when you asked that question. I think about that conversation a lot because so many times we find ourselves up against these walls, mental walls usually, and we don't know how to get through them, around them, over them. We just have this like wall of awful in front of ourselves that we're just like feeling stuck. And when I learned to regulate my nervous system, it was like all of the information that I had accumulated, all of the coaching that felt like it never went anywhere, all
Mhm.
of that stuff was finally actionable. And honestly, I think that's like the little known secret advantage and like a huge value add to doing this kind of work is that like tens of thousands of dollars worth of coaching and education that I had accumulated before that point all became actionable. It was like, okay, cool. It was logical before I knew how to do this, and yet I still got stuck. Now
Mhm.
it's logical, and I can also feel my way through it and take the steps needed to do the thing.
Yes. I love what you said about feel your way through it, because high achieving women often don't allow themselves to feel.
Yeah.
I don't have time for that. No feelings. And that means, unfortunately, I've seen this in myself and my community. You don't allow yourself to feel the negative, but then you also don't allow yourself to feel the positive.
Yeah.
And that's when you get to that state of like, I have this blessed life. Why don't I feel like it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning to celebrate wins can be really difficult for us high achievers. And it's something that I'm so glad that I have the accountability of like family and also, friends within my community and things to hold me to that because I can still kind of gloss over those things. But I tell
Mhm.
you what, every stage of writing this book, my, at the time, 9-year-old was always like, hey, did you celebrate that you finished your first draft? Or did you do this? Or we better go out for ice cream because you just, got done in the recording studio doing the Audible version or whatever the case may be. And I, okay, yeah, I'd better pause and let it sink in that this is actually happening and that it really is like a big deal.
What a gift that your 9-year-old said that to you. That like warms my heart to hear that from a little boy,
Yeah.
that he's like, hey, mom, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate the process. Let's
Yeah.
celebrate the work that you're doing.
And that's one of my favorite things I think about doing this work is seeing the way that it's reflected in my family. I actually included in part of the book some of the reflections from my family, but like for my husband and I, before we were together, he spent a number of years in, being a firefighter, an EMT, a cop, a bunch of other things where, he saved like over 100 lives with CPR and things like that before I even met him.
Mhm.
And I never really felt like we had this parallel. And when I spent this one morning just kind of talking to my family as I was wrapping up my first draft, and I was like, I'd really like to include some reflections from the family. Can you share with me like how this work has impacted, us as a family or you individually or our relationship? And it was just so heartwarming to me that he shared that like he felt like it really connected us in that way, and that he felt like even though I wasn't, physically touching people to save their lives, that he knew that I had also helped to save many lives, marriages, relationships,
Mhm.
businesses, all that kind of stuff, and that it really felt like that was a different bond between us with this work that I do.
Mhm.
And then there's my 9-year-old chimed in. He's so funny. I said, "How has this changed things for you?" And he had a one-word answer: "Monies." I was like, "All right, Jace, I appreciate that you understand the value of a dollar and that you love all the fun stuff that we get to do because of the money that comes in from this business." But then he went, I was like, "Go deeper, dude. Like, let's let's hear what's deeper." And then he expressed about like the bond between us. But I think I was most touched by, my 6-year-old. And this was like kind of just a story that happened right at that same time. But we had gone out. We have this really cute little like flower patch near our house, and it's like a part of a farm. They grow zinnias every year, and they put a sign out that says free flowers. You can stop, you can cut them. They put out scissors. They put out
So
vases
cute.
if you need them. It's super cute. You could like make a bouquet for somebody right on the side of the road, and we've done it for grandparents and teachers and my boys' girlfriends and so many other people over the years. And it was getting kind of the end of the growing season, and little guy's like, "I want to stop and cut flowers before they're all done." So we'd gone out to dinner. We were on our way home, and my husband looks at me. He's like, "Stop and cut the flowers." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." But as we're cutting them, I could just see him like so peaceful. The night before, he had like some really bad behavior. He'd gotten angry and frustrated, and it was like before bedtime, and he had not behaved his best and had like total outbursts. And so we're standing there cutting the flowers, forming this bouquet together. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, "You having fun, love? What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, Mom, I feel so peaceful here." And he starts
Oh,
pointing out everything. He's like, "The farmer's dog is so cute. The flowers are beautiful. The sun's setting. There's these cute little moths, here and there." And then he goes on to say, he goes, "You know, I didn't feel that way last night when I was angry." He's like, "I love how I feel here. I feel like nothing can upset me here." And like for me, receiving that as like, okay, here's a 6-year-old explaining what he's seeing, hearing, feeling, and experiencing, and understanding how different it is from a way that he just felt less than 24 hours ago, and processing all that. And I was like, like
yes.
that meant so much to me.
Yes. And it's so interesting the lessons that we get to see in our children and the things that we get to learn from being moms. And I think for a lot of women that I talk to, friends and community, our children were sent here to teach us the lessons we need to learn, right?
Yeah.
And so when
They're
you get to
beautiful mirrors.
yes, when you get to see those things, it's so validating and heartwarming. And I remember I was watching a parenting webinar recently, and I can't remember who the speaker was. It was because it was a panel of different people, and I can't remember who said it, but he said, we often are not sent the child we want, we're sent the child we need. And it's
Absolutely.
like, yes, they are here to teach us things.
Yep. They help us heal. We help them heal. We probably wound each other a bit along the way. And
Yeah.
that's just the beautiful part of life and family.
Yeah. So, okay, I want to dive into this book because number one, writing a book, congratulations.
Thank
That in
you.
and of itself is a huge project. And I want to ask before we get into the content of the book, I want to ask, how did you manage that from a time perspective, a creative capacity perspective, while also serving clients? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I love that you asked it because, yes, I have ADHD. And when I decided to commit to this, and I actually ended up writing about everything you just asked me in the book, not realizing that was going to be part of what I was going to write, but realizing it conveyed exactly what I thought people needed to hear that were also looking for these answers in their own life through the lens of writing the book. I didn't know what I was getting into. I knew that I had tried writing this book at least twice on my own previously, and
Mhm.
that I kept falling short of, how I thought it would go or what it needed. And I actually used some EFT tapping in 2021 and just let it go. I took all the tasks off my to-do list that had anything to do with the book. And I was just like, screw it. I'm putting it aside for right now. Like
Mhm.
I just can't right now. It feels resistant. I don't really want to do it and it doesn't feel like it's flowing. So I gave myself permission to let go. And then I just dove into that year client work and podcast guesting, and all of that stuff really refined my message for me in a very, easy way, because I was constantly having the conversations that I knew needed to be part of the book and understanding what people needed and getting great transformations in people that I was working with. And I was like, okay, cool. So this spring, I talked to my husband and I was like, I think I'm really ready to do this, but I want to, hire some people for accountability and help. And, I don't want to edit on my own or format or none of that stuff like appeals to me. I just want to write the dang thing and get it out there. And he agreed and he was like fully behind me. And we both were like, hey, I don't know what this is going to look like time wise. Like I said, I have 4 kids. I run a couple businesses from my home, and now I'm going to try to do this. I didn't even know how big of an endeavor it was, honestly, before I started. Like I thought I knew how big it was. I'm still learning how big it is. And yeah, my husband's awesome because when he commits to something with me, he just stands behind it. He's like a rock. So, every time that I'd get in my own way with it, he'd like remind me, hey, this is what we knew we were getting into. I knew that, I was starting with a full client load this spring and that I wanted to let that taper off a little bit as summer got to the end, so that I did have time and space to figure out marketing and, editing and all the things that, I needed to be a part of, even with other people helping me and getting into the recording studio to do the Audible version and stuff. So, but I love, love, love working with people. I love having a full client roster and I love selling. I love
Mhm.
all those things. So
Yeah.
for me, ultra uncomfortable to back off of all of that
Mhm.
in the name of, slowing down in order to gain traction and speed up, which I refer to in my book as slow is the new fast, because our nervous system thrives in slowness. And yet so many of us high functioning entrepreneurial moms don't go there.
Yeah.
So I really, really, really had to practice what I preach. And through every step of it, I was constantly just trying to figure out, okay, what feels unsafe here? How do I bring the safety and familiarity I need to progress? And what's next?
Mhm.
And
I
just,
love what you said about slowing down to speed up, because that is so true. And we are so used to like go, 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 do the thing, do the thing, do the next thing, do the next thing. But the slowing down gives us the capacity to be more effective, to
yeah,
actually do the next thing. And the other thing that I love that you said that I really want to make sure we don't gloss over is that you set it aside for in 2021 and said, this is
mhm,
a not right now. It's not a no, it's not a never, it's a not right now. And that going on podcasts and doing your work lets you refine your message.
absolutely.
And I am such an advocate for people doing podcast guesting, because I think it is an incredible tool to help support you in your message so that your marketing gets better, so that you can even better serve your clients. And, from a podcast guesting strategy, how did you fit that in? How did you make being on podcasts something that was a priority and something that you had time to do while also serving clients?
So I've always liked to have some time for networking.
Mhm.
So my networking time pretty much became podcasting time.
Yeah.
I also realized that all the other things that felt like throwing spaghetti at the wall for me, like a blog or a lot of like the forced social media creation,
Mhm.
felt a lot more natural to me when I started doing them through podcasts. So,
Yes.
initially I, was able to get on some shows on my own, and then I hired a booking agent because I didn't have the time to land myself on all the shows that I needed to be on, but they did.
Mhm.
So I could keep working. They could get me the gigs that I wanted. And then I just needed to show up and have conversations. And
Yes.
yeah, when you're
I
lined up with the right shows, you find a lot of the time that the hosts become your clients.
Mhm.
And when the hosts become your clients, then they love talking to you and their listeners become your clients. So
Yeah.
it's not a it's not a overnight strategy. So I know a lot of people come to me to talk about that because they know I've had, a lot of success through podcasting. And like,
Mhm.
I can still remember being, 6 months in or so and talking with my booking agent and being like, this is not what I signed up for. Like, this is not working the way that I hoped. But that was what brought about the tweaks that were necessary to be on the right shows, talking to the right people, about the right things to get the outcome that I wanted. So it wasn't like it was all on them that it wasn't working. It was,
Mhm.
I had to take accountability for like, what do I need to change about my messaging or even my speaking and things like that, that I have control over and I can adjust and play around with. But
Yeah.
I love podcasting. I mean, I did a whole podcast on my show about how I use podcasts for content. I don't mean, I don't love content creation, but I love that I can hand a podcast off to my team. They can create videos, they can create quote posts. They could even, if I still wanted to have a blog, it's very easy now with AI and transcription to just
Mhm.
create a blog out of it. There's so much that we can do so easily with that. And all I have to do is hand it over.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said about you did it on your own for a while and then you outsourced so that you could go back to your zone of genius. But by doing it on your own for a while, you were probably able to help set that outsourced team member up for success
Yes.
because you had the trial and error, you had the data, you had learned things versus just like, here, take it from me, make it work, do it.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think when you're working with a team to do anything, you have to create, it is always trial and error.
Yeah.
A lot of my team's been working with me for several years now. We're still learning things and figuring things out. We always will be. It's no
Mhm.
different than the whole concept behind my business, becoming more of me. The journey of becoming is never ending, but
Yeah.
the my whole purpose in this journey is to make it one that we enjoy being present for.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think and podcasting too, the ability to have the conversation and speak and it be a two-way conversation. I know, you host your own podcast and having a guest just brings out different thoughts than
Yeah.
doing it on your own. And I think that goes back to like we're meant to be in community. We're meant to connect with other people. We're not meant to do this life thing
Yes.
alone and in a silo.
And for me, I love it because I'm introverted for the most part. I know it never seems that way to people. And they're like, really? But I'm like, this is my social time. I'm not, it's about all I have the energy for, between, I love, socializing with my clients and I love socializing on podcasts. And otherwise, I'm kind of like a homebody hermit. And, I enjoy this as a way of getting what I do and I love out there. And I
Yeah.
want to add,
I'm
oh,
curious,
sorry,
do you know your human design type
I'm a
and profile
manifesting
lines?
generator.
Okay. What about do you know the numbers, the profile numbers?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So there's a number, it's a 2. I'm a 6-2. I'm a 6-2 generator. But the 2, the profile is that you're a hermit and that you need that alone time. And before I discovered human design, like I didn't know that about myself because I would consider myself an extrovert because I do like talking to people. I get energy around people. But I also need that like pull back in to recharge. And that's the hermit of like, you might like the experience, but then you need a break to come
Yeah.
back and fill your cup back
I'm
up.
very much the same way. I do enjoy people and
Mhm.
some energize me more than others. But yeah, I mean, to me it's very like pleasurable. And that was actually another thing that was kind of set in stone for me before I started this process of book writing this year. I said that it must be pleasurable. Like that
Yeah.
I was literally going to hard stop on any days or time that this process was not being done through the lens of being enjoyable and pleasurable. So
Yeah.
like I invested in coaching around pleasure for myself during it. My husband and I elevated all sorts of things in our marriage during that time. We did a lot of things that just simply felt good during that time and brought so much more of that back into my life that it felt like it was missing. I really do think that pleasure is the fuel that most of us as women in general are just missing out on because we somehow think that it can just go on the back burner and stay there indefinitely when it's actually like it's total fuel for everything that we want to do.
Yes. And you're right. We very often put it on the back burner. And I don't know if that comes from cultural messaging around people pleasing, around, growing up and being taught that like other people's needs matter more, that you as the female are the nurturer and the caretaker. But it is so easy to put on the back burner.
Yep. So
Yeah.
I've intentionally put it on the front burner, front and center this year, and it's been
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, and that it's not a nice to have, that it truly could be the fuel. But like logically, that doesn't make sense. Logically, it's like, well, why would taking care of myself make me better? I just have to do the things I have to take care of other people. But that's where that like masculine and feminine energy kind of comes in of like, we have to have both. And
Yeah, it's also where the law of
often,
attraction comes in too,
Mhm.
and the whole idea of slowness being actually another form of fuel for us that allows us to have the safety to gain the traction and to do more of the things.
Yeah.
Because we can act like we're gonna get so much more done when we're running around like a chicken with our head cut off and it's all, chaos and cortisol spikes and confusion, but we get way less done from that state of mind of being than we do when we just align with the frequency of what we want to attract into our lives, slow down and allow ourselves to receive it instead of thinking that we're in charge of creating it and doing it. I
Mhm.
really think that we can do a lot less and be a lot more.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. Well, you mentioned being diagnosed with ADHD later in life. And when you and I first worked together, that was a question you had asked me of, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD? And I was like, no, of course not. And funny enough, after we were kind of our time working together, I listened to a Mel Robbins podcast that's like, do I have ADHD? And I'm listening to it and I was like, Mel, Theresa, maybe Ruthie does. And maybe that is something that we are dealing with. So talk to me a little bit about that, like later in life diagnosis of ADHD. And if that's something that you see in a theme in your clients, or if that's something that you see often in high achieving women.
So I think I naturally attract people that are like myself to work with.
Mhm.
I think that's just, the law of things. But being diagnosed later in life, like I said, I've had it my entire life. There wasn't any doubt in my mind that I had it. And then once like three of my kids had already been diagnosed, it was like maybe mom should like go to the doctor too and just like, put a seal on it here. But it didn't really matter to me so much to be diagnosed. In fact, it was interesting because after being diagnosed, I kind of felt like more low about it than ever, which was
Mhm.
kind of weird, but it was like, okay, so this is actually a thing. And so many people consider this to be like such an obstacle or such a setback where I've always looked at it as more of a superpower.
Mhm.
But, as I tried to do so many things, I sometimes felt that same, setback of like, oh, it's hard or whatever, you get stuck in the kind of like the lack mindset. But I wouldn't give up like the hyper focus and the creativity or any of that, like for anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the later in life diagnosis, I dabbled in, I feel like I've tried every little thing there is to try to, work on it from, medications to, herbal supplements, nootropics, all different types of, meditations. I mean, EFT tapping and hypnotherapy are amazing for it. And I use those. But yeah, it's an interesting process of trying to figure out what works best for us. But I think that is the case whether you have ADHD or not. And let's face it, like you don't even need an ADHD diagnosis to be incredibly distracted in this day and age.
Yeah.
So, a lot of what I talk about in my book in the later chapters is about how I manage my time, how I plan my week. I give resources for other people to be able to do that as well,
Mhm.
and also kind of like the brain science behind it, and the resistance that so many of us have to planning and following through on things.
Yes. That resistance to planning. I see that a lot when I talked with people about planning content because I'm like, but the planning makes such a difference and it helps and it makes your marketing more strategic. But that, like, ugh, I just don't want to sit down and plan. Is that
Yes.
resistance coming from, where do you think that comes from for so many people?
Well, anything that we're resistant to is going to have some kind of a unsafety or some kind of a subconscious belief tied in with it,
Yeah.
and it's always individual, whatever
Hmm.
the case may be. But we can be just as afraid of success as we are of failure. And I love, now, and we weren't doing this when we were working together, but I do a lot more like regressive hypnotherapy now with my
Hmm.
clients, where we go
Hmm.
back and we find those root causes, those instances, those first times when those things came up that now contribute to a lack of confidence or a resistance to planning or the self sabotage or whatever else. And it's really cool to be able to make the transformation around that and rewire those things that people have been carrying around for decades, usually,
Hmm.
that they have been accepting as if they are fact when it's really just the stuff they were soaking up like a sponge before they were really in their conscious mind altogether anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that makes a really big difference. But I
Yeah.
mean, the resistance, like I said, it can come up for so many different reasons. And I've seen
Hmm.
so many really interesting stories unfold with clients that I've worked with about why, you know?
Yeah. I saw it was a reel that I saw the other day and it was talking about rewiring and that rewiring a thought, can take like 200 repetitions before you can rewire it. but in play, it can be rewired in like less than 20 repetitions. And it goes back to that like carefreeness and that like having fun and pleasure and
Pleasure. Yep, I
joy.
was gonna say it's pleasure
And
for
then
you.
it changes. I'm not a brain scientist, but I would
Me
imagine
neither.
it changes the chemistry of your brain so that
Yeah.
true change and transformation becomes less resistant.
Yeah. Because so
Yeah.
many of us can understand logically, like, okay, so, you know, I grew up where this happened or that happened. And so that's probably why I'm this way now. But understanding something logically and from our conscious mind is completely different than the way that our subconscious mind understands it.
Hmm.
And the subconscious mind, I mean, it records everything. Like it's crazy. I mean, by the time you're 21, you have the equivalent of hundreds of like full versions of like, remember Encyclopedia Britannica? I'm going to date
Hmm.
myself here. Hundreds of versions of like a full set of Encyclopedia Britannica is recorded on your subconscious. I like to call it, it's like a endless Google Drive, and it's all in there, and you're accessing it whenever you're looking for something that you run a program around. So that's way, way, way more than what the conscious mind has recorded. The subconscious mind beats it out every single time. And then the other like thing that's a truth is that the emotions are always going to beat out logic. So whenever you have something that's tied into emotion for you, then it doesn't matter whether you know logically what you need to do. The emotions will win every single time unless you can kind of get to that root cause and relieve the energetic blockage or rewrite the script for yourself. And, yeah, repetition is sometimes very helpful there. But that
Yeah.
repetition done from the conscious mind is not going to help you the same way that repetition is going to be helpful when you're in a trance state like hypnosis.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Well, we could probably go on and on and on about this because we're both gonna just nerd out on all of this, and such a fun conversation. But before we wrap up, I do have a couple of fun get to know you questions. I always love to ask our Unfiltered Friday guests, and talking about pleasure and joy and doing things for fun. I would love to know what is a bingeable show that you've been into that either you've watched recently or is a favorite from the past that you would recommend.
Yes, recently, and I was late to the party, but I don't watch much TV, so, like, this is saying a lot, and it landed as a quote in my book also because I liked it that much. Ted Lasso.
Yes. So good. So good. My husband and I watched that together, and when it ended, he was like, I'm so sad this is over. It's
Yeah,
such a good show."
but other than that, I normally binge, like, sex documentaries. So, put it out there. I love stuff around, like, sex, pleasure, any documentaries there with, like, real life studies and things like that. I totally geek out on that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, along with your bingeable show, what's your go-to snack?
Right now, I love the lemon skinny dipped almonds.
Ooh, I've never had the lemon ones. That
They're
sounds
good. They have
good.
a strawberry lemon one too that was like a summer thing. They were pretty tasty also.
Yeah, I just got pumpkin spice almonds. They're not dipped,
Ooh,
they're like dusted, but they're really good too. So I'll have to
sounds
look
tasty.
for those lemon ones. That sounds awesome. All right. So along with the snack, then we move into beverages. So what's your current go-to adult beverage and non-adult beverage?
Let's see. Adult beverage, I have a thing for Blue Moon beer because my husband and I honeymooned in Wisconsin where that always seemed to be on tap and it was like so cold it had ice crystals in it and it was delicious. So that's always a memory one for me. I don't drink much though, honestly. And then I pretty much like survive off of Spindrift. So I would say that's probably I always have a Spindrift, but I'm like looking at my desk. I literally have an ice water, a Spindrift, and then a homemade dirty chai latte that I added protein powder into. So like
Yeah.
I'm complicated with beverages.
Yes, I get it. I think most people that I am friends with have 4 or 5 drinks on their desk at any given time, and they're all different.
Good thing. I'm glad I'm not alone because I always feel like I got a lot of beverages going on.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, and then last one, I love to talk about travel. So I'd love to know either a recent trip that you took that you really loved or something that you're planning upcoming that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, both. Cape Cod over the summer with my family was amazing. Got an Airbnb like right on a lake and my parents came along and that was just so many awesome memories. Plus I was in the middle of writing the book and I like had pleasurable mornings of writing from the little like second story deck off of my bedroom. And it was my own little like Walden for a week. And then coming up, my husband and I are celebrating our 15th anniversary with 4 kids. We can't get away for very long, but we're going to go upstate New York to Mohunk Mountain Resort, which has an amazing spa. It's like carved
Mm.
into this mountainside. And I've been wanting to go there for a few years now. And we're going to enjoy a weekend up there.
Yes, that'll be so good. And that'll be a great way to celebrate the book launch too,
Yes.
right?
Yes. We're going like a month later than our anniversary almost because I want to be done with the chaos of the book launch so that I can truly just relax and enjoy him for the weekend.
Yes, I love it. Well, Theresa, this was such a great conversation. If our listeners are interested in learning more, where can they connect with you? Where do you hang out online?
Yeah, Instagram's great at Theresa Lear Levine. My website is the same, www.theresalearlevine.com. And you and I are going to do some tapping that we're going to give people too. And they can access that by going to theprivatesessions.com, where they will receive not just whatever tapping we end up doing, which will be amazing, but over 60 other tapping sessions. So that's an awesome resource if you want to get hands-on with managing your own nervous system. And then finally, my book, which is called Becoming More Me, Tapping into Success, Subconscious Secrets of an ADHD Entrepreneurial Mom, is available on Amazon.
Yes. And those tapping sessions, you know, I totally understand and resonate with the idea of tapping, but having a guide and someone to kind of work along with you and walk you through the script is game changing. And so I definitely recommend you guys download those. We'll have the link in the show notes. But again, thank you so much for being here. This was an
Oh,
awesome
it's so much
conversation.
fun. Thanks for having me, Ruthie.